We're Harry and Lori. My name's Harry Snyder. This is Lori True. We're with the Advocacy Initiative at the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. The Advocacy Initiative was started to try to link up people who know how to crunch data, do analysis, and come out with good policy with actually making change. Boots on the ground is our attempt to do that in another realm. So tonight we have a Boots on the Ground event featuring activists who are working on the matters of the Black Lives Matters. And we want you to learn about what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it, and then ask questions. There'll be plenty of time for questions and discussion afterwards. The notion is to not only learn, but get involved and do something. Walk out the door, pick up a flyer, call, make an effort to actually help out in making the Black Lives Matter movement more effective than it even has been so far. We all know that the arc of history bends towards justice, but it doesn't bend by itself. You have to move and get involved and bend that arc of history towards justice.
Thanks, Harry, and thanks everyone for coming. Just a couple of announcements about tonight's event. We are live. We're going to videotape it, so if you have a problem with that, you may not want to be in here. Hopefully you don't. And we will be posting the video on the Advocacy Initiative website, along with the videos of the last two Boots on the Ground events. So watch for your announcements. If you didn't register, you won't know about these announcements. So you need to register, and then you'll be on the CPHP, the Center for Public Health Practice listserv. So make sure you let people know in front what your email is so we can keep in touch with you. We will be doing 3 more Boots on the Ground public health events next semester. So stay tuned for those. They should be as equally exciting and riveting as this year's. We're also going to be tweeting. So those of you who have a Twitter feed, how many of you have Twitter feeds? Come on, you public health communicators. We're going to be live tweeting this. Our handle is at UC Act for Health with a 4 instead of an FOR. And the hashtag for tonight is, of course, Black Lives Matter. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. Please help us get the word out as the evening rolls on with your live tweeting. We teach a class at the Advocacy Initiative, and we welcome UC Berkeley students to take the class. You know, you don't have to be a grad student in public health to take the class. Just talk to us, and if you've got the chutzpah to ask us, we'll probably let you take the class, right, Harry? We're teaching it next semester, and there's handouts at the door, so please consider signing up for the class. I want to thank folks who really helped us put this convening together, aside from our amazing speakers, particularly Marc, Philpart, and PolicyLink, who we couldn't have done this without PolicyLink, and Marc and Tara Weeks, who convened our amazing panel. So thanks, you guys, and I'm sure we'll thank you again in many ways. But we'd had some student help and some staff help. Katie Johnson, the amazing Katie Johnson, who helped with logistics, Lisa Peterson, communications, Nikki Shapiro, logistics, Amber Piot helped us get the word out in unusual ways, and of course, students Kristen, Jessica, and Xenia. The Multicultural Health and Action Group and the Asian Pacific Islander Women's Circle co-sponsored this, along with the Office of Diversity at the School of Public Health, as well as our funders, the California Endowment and the California Healthcare Foundation. So we're grateful to all of you. It's a group effort, and we really appreciate you being here. If we run out of room, we'll be, what's the word? In trouble. What's it called? Periscope. We're using Periscope to live cast it outside to people who have the Periscope app. So if the room fills out, you can go out and do it. But there's some seats up in front, so please fill them in. Okay, without any further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce the Dean of the School of Public Health, Steph Bertozzi.
Great. Thanks, Lori. And I want to reiterate my thanks to everyone for coming, to Harry and Lori for having the idea to make this happen, linked to their extraordinary class, and to Marc and the panelists for coming. I'm not going to introduce them because you're going to hear about that later. And I just wanted to say a couple of things about how sad and happy I am by the fact that we're here. I'm sad because of what provoked the reason that we're here. We saw some extraordinary displays of violence. I'm happy because those particular displays of violence have mobilized an extraordinary response. I was reading this morning that somebody asked the question, how many mass shootings do we have in the US every day? And the answer is about one. And I've spent my entire professional life outside this country working in global health. So I moved back. I left the country when my oldest was 2 years old and my little one wasn't born yet, and I came back when they were heading into college. And extraordinary things happened in this country over that time. But I was amazed moving back here. I was amazed that people weren't in the streets. I was amazed to see that the Affordable Care Act was implemented, and then in about half the country, a decision was made to deny affordable care benefits to people who were Medicaid eligible. To expand Medicaid to include a whole class of people without resources into affordable health care. And if you look at where that happened, it's extraordinarily strongly correlated with former slave-owning states. Extraordinarily. In fact, somebody told me the other day that there was only one that wasn't and one that was, sort of that didn't match, and Kentucky's now moving back to try to get rid of the ACA in Kentucky. If you come back to this country after a work lifetime away, and you look at mass incarceration in this country from the perspective of anywhere else on earth, it's just extraordinary. I mean, just extraordinary. And so coming back to this country and coming into a school of public health focused on domestic issues, I was actually surprised. I've spent my life working on global health. I spent my life working on HIV. And I was surprised at the lack of outrage. And some of people here have whacked me upside the head for saying that, because they pointed out that, in fact, there's lots of outrage. It just isn't always able to be expressed. But something happened over this last year. It happened because of Black Lives Matter. And it was sparked by a couple of things, but you could say World War I was sparked by the assassination of a stupid prince. And sometimes it's an accident of history that enables social movements to happen. And so I'm happy about that. I'm sad about why it happened, but I'm very happy that it's happening. And I'm thrilled that it's caused all of you to come out here tonight, that it's caused our students and our faculty and our staff to become organized. So we have monthly town halls. We talk about these issues now. And that's a good thing. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Steph. Harry's now going to introduce Marc.
Hi, again. As Laurie said, we couldn't have done this without PolicyLink and Marc and Tara Weeks putting this on for us. This event is dependent on Marc's personal effort in organizing this. And I want to just note that this is all of the people you see up here were here half an hour ahead of time because they're advocates. You show up. You show up. That's what it's about. Marc is the director of the Boys and Men of Color initiative at PolicyLink. He is the co-directs the Institute for Black Male Achievement, and he is the principal coordinator for the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, a statewide network working to improve the lives of boys and men of color in the state of California. So, Marc, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's all yours.
Thank you. Good evening. All right. We're very excited to be here. When Harry and Laurie invited us to organize this panel, we were excited to do so. We jumped at the chance because we felt it was a critical conversation for not only the School of Public Health, but for the university to have. And many of my colleagues have been in conversations with others on the campus about Black Lives Matter and about the movement and how to further it. And so we're excited anytime we can have an opportunity to have a forum like this to be able to push these values and elevate these issues. what we'll do today is have an interactive conversation. You won't have a lot of talking heads up here. We're really hoping to have a dialogue. So we'll have a few questions that I'll ask the panelists to start, but we really want to get into what some of your questions are, what some of the issues are that you're wrestling with, so that we can have a rich back and forth. We feel like that's the best way for us to move this conversation forward for the School of Public Health and for the campus. I know that we have a technology fix if the room gets too crowded, but I want to encourage as many people as possible to come in, at least within the means of the law. And a little civil disobedience never hurt anybody. So if we can get as many folks, right? Exactly. So we could get as many folks in here as possible. There are seats up front. There are, tons of seats in the middle. If there's a seat next to you that's open, please raise your hand. So those of you who are sitting on the floor or in the very back behind the partition, you can come up and grab a seat. We're going to begin by showing a little bit of a video that really speaks to what Black Lives Matter is about. And for those of you who are true public health. Oh, thank you. You guys didn't have to do that. I appreciate it. For those of you who are, true public health heads, such as myself, this moment in time that we're in, and the conversation to try and, bring greater relevance of this movement to your academic studies, I think is really important. When I was in public health school at the University of Washington, I tried relentlessly to have these conversations and to get people to think more intentionally about the world outside of our academic walls. And it was very difficult. I feel like, if I was a student now, it would be much easier, but I know that may not be the case. So I'm looking forward to teasing all of that out within the context of tonight's conversation, and just know that the Black Lives Matter movement has everything to do with public health. If you're not talking about resistance, liberation, the health and well-being of people absent disease, that's those things, those principles, the World Health definition of public health, all of that has everything to do with what people are fighting for in Black Lives Matter. And you'll hear more of that. There'll be a lot of discussion around that. And so we just hope that you'll take that to heart and ask questions if there's something that you want to know more about. So without any further ado, I'm just going to ask Mike to start the video. You all right?
Longer sentences, 3 strikes and you're out. More prisons, more prevention, 100,000 more relief.
So that's the frame that many of us are operating from. That's the reality of the communities that we live in. And so what I want to do now is just turn to each of our panelists to give a brief introduction, say a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll get into the Q&A.
All right, cool. So I'll start off. I'm Devonte Jackson. I actually was a UC Berkeley student. I plan to do re-entry actually next year sometime. I have like a semester and some change left. So yeah, I'll be a super duper senior at that point. But yeah, I'm the Bay Area organizer right now full-time for the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And we work to really unify Black immigrant communities as well as African American communities to address some of these issues that we've seen on the screen of mass criminalization. And we do the linkage between like the historic struggle African Americans have faced in this country and complement that with the experiences of Black immigrants who are newer to the country. I'm also a founding member of Black Lives Matter Bay Area chapter. Was part of the 14 brave Black activists that got arrested last Black Friday at BART. We shut down BART to disrupt business as usual to call, thank you. So yeah, we disrupted business as usual to call attention to the epidemic of police killings in our community. But it was not only police killings we were hoping to address. We hope to address a war on Black communities in the many ways in which that manifests. Beyond police killings, there's gentrification, a huge housing crisis, underemployment and unemployment of our communities. So these are all of the issues that we're hoping to address. I'm happy to be here. Yeah, that's a little bit about me and who I am and what I do.
Good evening. My name is Kat Brooks. I am an unapologetically Black radical organizer, mother. I'm also an artist. Before I say too much more, I'd actually like to take a moment of silence for Mario Woods. He was executed in broad daylight by the San Francisco Police Department yesterday. They shot him over 20 times. Okay. I am also a founding member of Black Lives Matter Bay Area chapter. I'm also one of the Black Friday 14. I am the co-chair of the Onyx organizing committee. I've been an activist most of my life, but since Oscar Grant was murdered in 2009, all of my work has been focused on eradicating police terror. Onyx was formed out of that movement because there was a real need for Black leadership, much like what you're seeing today with Black Lives Matter and the assertion that the most impacted should be at the forefront of that struggle. We were having a similar debate, that's a nice word for it, during the struggle for Oscar Grant. And so we formed Onyx as a Black liberation organization with a specific focus on police terror. And we're in the streets pretty consistently. That was a 3-year protracted struggle with the state. But because police terror does not just happen in our communities on occasion, it happens every single day. We found ourselves in the street a lot, but we also found ourselves reacting, right? And we found ourselves feeling like the state was actually setting the terms for struggle. So they would kill somebody, we would call people out in the street, right? And then the cycle would repeat itself. And we started to feel like we were chasing Black bodies. We started to feel really exploitative, that we weren't actually fulfilling the mission of our organization, and we weren't actually doing anything to push the conversation forward and to actually create change in our community. And so we started having conversation about, well, if police terror happens in our communities every day, right, and murder is the extreme version of that. We have to understand that Black people, brown people too, and indigenous folks are terrorized by the police daily, and that's everything from having an occupying army in your community, that's from racial profiling, from stop and frisk, to extortion, to assault, to threat of sexual assault, right, the gamut. That if that's happening in our community every day, then we need a vehicle, we need some sort of entity that is not just reacting to when police are murdering us or terrorizing us, but is being visionary about how we actually eradicate it. And so out of that came the formation of the Anti-Police Terror Project. And our mission is to eradicate police terror in communities of color. And we do that, we're working towards that in a myriad of ways. We work in committee form. Our primary committee right now is the First Responders Committee. And the first responders are on the scene now we've gotten it down to about 30 to 60 minutes after the police kill somebody. And that's in large part because we've built up relationships with the community and trust that we're going to come do what we say we're going to do. We collect community testimony, we take pictures, and we put out a community-based narrative of what actually happened. On 3 different occasions, we've forced the state to change their story, right? So they say this happened, we gather enough testimony, the next time they have a press conference, they say something else. The other thing that's more in alignment with what people on the street saw. The other things that we do is provide free legal support to the families. We fundraise for both burial costs, but also we strongly encourage independent autopsies, because that's one of the strongest tools a family can have to push back on the state's narrative. And we've launched a family support group in order to provide a safe space for families to go through the process of violently having the loved one's life stolen by law enforcement. I'm probably out of time. Okay, yeah, okay.
My name is Michael McBride. As you can tell by my costume, I am a follower of Jesus, pastor in serve as a pastor of a church here in the city of Berkeley called The Way Church, and lead a national campaign called the Live Free campaign. Now, when I say I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm not talking about the domesticated, westernized, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus that is used to bring validation to all these forms of dehumanization that we see. I'm talking about the dark-skinned Palestinian Jew who lived on the underside of the empire of his day and was executed by the state for leading a liberation movement where he literally defined his own mission to heal bodies and to exorcise demons out of the systems. So I take my cue from that Jesus proudly and believe that if more folk followed that Jesus, then we have a different kind of practice of religion and faith in this country. So our work then is really trying to unleash a practice of faith by clergy leaders and congregations and laity who can understand the criminalization and over-policing of our community members of all races and backgrounds, but primarily Black, brown, poor folk who find themselves subjected, as Kat has said, to mass incarceration, intracommunal violence, state violence, lack of opportunities, divestment from the kinds of life-giving institutions and opportunities, and really only left with a pathway that leads towards death and destruction, either of their own doing or of the doing of others around them. So our work started out really trying to focus in our Live Free campaign on addressing violence between individuals and communities. I started out as a student services director of a continuation school here in the city of Berkeley. We had a funeral for one of my young people who was killed. His name was Larry, and we did a funeral. About 500 young folks showed up. I knew about half of them. I asked how many have been to one funeral. All of them raised their hand. 2 funerals, all of them kept their hands up. I got as high as 10, and half of the young people in this funeral wept while they kept their hands lifted. And I realized that I had to do more than try to help them graduate. I had to stop them from dying on the streets. So we launched a violence prevention campaign that is called Ceasefire, and we brought that strategy here to the Bay Area and have been able to have the lowest numbers of homicides among young people. And yet we still saw that the trauma by the system of incarceration over policing was also something we had to deal with as well. So our work has been attempting to organize faith congregations all across the country to actively lean into a different kind of intervention and framing for how we bring healing and hope to our communities, using a public health frame, using a non-punitive, non-judgmental, deep ministry of presence, as we call it, and to dismantle white supremacy, white domination, structural and systemic oppression, and prayerfully usher in the beloved kingdom that Dr. King talked about, and what Jesus prayed about, the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven.
I'm Rosa Aqeel. I'm the legislative director for PICO, California, and this is my pastor.
That's your name. We say that.
We do. We at PICO, we are the largest statewide faith-based community organizing network in the state. We work on a whole host of social justice issues. And my role really in the last couple years has been to develop a policy agenda that really has an eye towards making Black Lives Matter. And I think one of the things that our organization has done that is probably one of the most significant things that we can do, that anybody in this room can do and should do, is look first to yourself. We can't transform the world outside of these walls if we ourselves cannot accept our own privilege and acknowledge our own racism and prejudice. And so white supremacy will continue to rule the day if we think that all of the racists are out there, because they're all in here. Proudly, I was a co-leader in leading a policy advocacy campaign to get AB 953 signed into law. It is a bill that requires that we collect racial profiling data by police officers in this state. It is the most comprehensive legislation in the country, and while it is only collecting data, you could not believe the incredible act of God that we had to provide Governor Brown in order for him to get the bill signed. More about that later, but I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Andrew Sudler, and I'm a second-year MPH student here in the School of Public Health in our Health and Social Behavior program. And I just want to begin by saying I'm very humbled to be on this panel today, and I look forward to all of your comments and questions and learning more from my fellow panelists. We're really here in part of my role to talk about the systemic racism we've been facing in the School of Public Health. It's no secret to any of you that we live in a society that is racist, and we learn, like in many educational institutions, we learn in an institution that is racist. And the first thing we needed to do was name that racism. And that's something that we weren't doing last year, as we kept hearing murder after murder after murder of Black bodies in the streets, and why that was not being acknowledged as a public health issue. But we all know that it really goes beyond the murders of Black people as a public health issue, right? Because racism has undeniable health effects in all kinds of forms. And we know that people of color, especially Black people, are disproportionately affected by every type of health outcome you can possibly imagine. And if those of us who are here to be educated as future public health leaders and professionals are not the ones who are understanding what is behind these disparities, instead of just naming race as a risk factor and not racism as the risk factor, then we will go out and continue to perpetuate the problems that we already see existing in our society. And so in response to the silence that we were seeing last year from our administration and from many of our professors and classes that we were taking, a group of students got together and formed what was known as the School of Public Health Students in Solidarity with Black Lives Matter group. And this group was really meant to call for systemic, institutional, and interpersonal change here in the School of Public Health. We can talk a little bit later about a lot of the things that sort of came out of that movement. Some of them have already been alluded to today in terms of town hall forums on privilege, power, racism, unconscious bias that we've been hosting, as well as the school is going through a curriculum redesign process right now. And we just finished writing a new structural competency and cultural humility requirement for the School of Public Health for our master's students. And so this is the type of change that we're engaged in. Of course, we have many more asks in terms of transparency, in terms of faculty hirings, and really in terms of where the finances are going to support issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion here in the School of Public Health and in the wider Berkeley campus. And we look forward to speaking with you today. So thank you.
So as you can tell, we have a great group, and I'm very honored to call all of you, with the exception of Andrew, who I just met a couple days ago, good friends and allies. I want to start with asking a question of Devonte about just what is Black Lives Matter? What is the movement for Black lives? If you could just help us better understand that.
Yeah, so I can go into the founding of Black Lives Matter. There are three courageous leaders, Black women that founded Black Lives Matter. Is Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. And Opal is my boss. She's the executive director of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And all of these folks have been leaders in the Black community doing work. And also, so how it actually came to be was Alicia Garza was really responding to the murder of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman. And that she wrote like a love letter to Black people on Facebook. And part of that love letter included Black Lives Matter. And it wasn't in hashtag form, but Patrice kind of retweeted the love letter with Black Lives Matter, and Opal kind of thought to make it into a platform, into a network, to actually start mobilizing people around the cause. So it really escalated at Mike Brown's killing in Ferguson by Officer Darren Wilson, who was not indicted. He was shot down, his body laid in the street for more than 4 hours. And the community was outraged. And then we really seen that Black Lives Matter was used in the protest movement in Ferguson, and it sparked the imaginations of people across the country who are fighting for freedom. So that's a little bit of a background to how Black Lives Matter has started, and I just wanted to describe it because it has been a really like family space for me in Oakland, being able to connect with Black people and to really be together to address to heal as a community, like seeing those images, seeing those graphics of our folks being shot down on the daily is traumatic. And so what we needed was a healing space. So that's one thing that Black Lives Matter has been, but it's also been an avenue for us to fight for our lives, really. We've engaged in different campaigns and civil disobedience to really address the state-sanctioned violence in our communities. And we've done it while rejecting politics of respectability. We don't hope to look cute and do it too, right? But it's also about just being an avenue for us to really build a new alternative to today's society, one in which Black lives actually matter. So yeah, that's a little bit about what Black Lives Matter is. I love the movement, and it's been going strong for over a year now, and I believe it's not going to stop until we win.
Thank you. Kat, you've talked a lot about police terror in describing Black Lives Matter and the work that you do. And when Devonte was describing the work in his introduction, he mentioned the war on communities of color and mentioned a whole host of issues, from gentrification to economic discrimination, et cetera. How does all of that fit within this narrative of Black Lives Matter, even though we know that the police terror piece is the piece that has the most prominence? Can you give us a sense for how all of it is sort of wrapped up?
Sure. Two things I want to say quickly before that. One is why we call it police terror, and I really need to give a nod to Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., who really coined that phrase, because if we're really moving towards liberation, we can't speak in euphemisms, right? Because if we speak in euphemisms, then we water down the people's will to resist. So we have to call it what it is, right? And what is happening in our community by definition is terror. So that's the first thing I want to say. The other thing I want to say was to put it in very real context. We're talking about one every 28 hours, and actually since the advent of the Black Lives Matter movement, we're talking about one every 8 or 9 hours. We're talking about a genocide happening in the United States of America. And if this was happening in any other country in the world, there would be meetings in the White House. They would be talking about, do they send in the military? Do they send in financial aid? Do we get peace, whatever, on the ground? Like, how do we do this? How do we stop this dictator that is murdering his own people? But that is what is happening in this country. So I just wanted to frame that around why, in part of why we call it a war. And Devonte really said a lot of the other piece, right? The war on Black lives has many, many tentacles. So when you look at who is at the who is at the worst receiving end of every horrific thing that is happening in this country. You're talking about black people. We are the fastest growing prison population. We are the ones dying largely of AIDS. We are the ones being pushed out of Oakland. We are the ones being miseducated, right? And so all of those things are connected, but they're connected under the banner, as Pastor McBride brought up, of white supremacy, right? The system that exists in our country to ensure white dominance at the cost of black and other people of color's submission. And so it's not an accident. There are intentional policies and practices that are put into place to keep this paradigm. And what's really disgusting about it is that at the end of the day, the reason is to protect the profit bottom line. And that's been the case since this country was formed. This country was founded on race-based capitalism, right? When folks came over here initially, white folks and black folks, indentured servants, everybody could work to get their way out, everybody, right? And at some point, it started messing with the profit margin, so they had to figure out how they had a consistent source of free labor. And that's when niggers were born. That's when that started. And the way that they kept those people in line was incredible violence, right? Brutality beyond description, nothing that most of us in this room can even imagine. That is the tradition and the history of this country, and every single institution, policy, and practice that has been created since that time has been to maintain that dynamic. And thus we have the war, the daily war on black lives, and we are dying. We are literally dying. We're talking about education. It's not just about ensuring that children graduate, it's ensuring that they stay alive. When we're talking about the state of our communities, it's not just about we want nice gardens, it's about we want to stay alive. The pollution of West Oakland, they call it the West Oakland cough. Because if you live in West Oakland, you've got it because of the pollution. You think they couldn't do that in the hills? There's no way they could do that in the hills, right? And so it's those many different facets. The housing crisis in Oakland is happening right now. Who was being pushed out of Oakland into Tracy and Livermore and all these other places, where, by the way, the rents are going up too because they know that we're coming out there, right? Is black people. So it's consistent, it's interconnected, and it's intentional and strategic.
Thank you. Pastor Mike, I want to turn to you and ask about how bias bleeds into all of this. I mean, we've talked a little bit about racism, but when we think about bias and how it manifests, how does that play into this war on black lives and black communities?
Well, we know there's science now that is showing us that implicit bias and unconscious racial anxiety reside in all of us. We know that you can actually measure it. You can go to the Harvard website and actually do your own implicit bias test, and you can get a number that lets you know how biased you are. We know it. It's a fact. What we are not able to grasp yet is why is it that black people are so despised by everyone? And you know, my entry into this particular liberation struggle is not through Black Lives Matter. I showed up in Ferguson 3 days after Michael Brown was killed. Nobody was saying Black Lives Matter yet. Those young people were out there, and I joined them facing down tanks and military-style vehicles. We were being tear gas, shot with rubber bullets, pushed around with assault weapons. And the reason why we have this movement is because a traumatized community refused to go back inside, even though all the adults, including clergy, elected officials, public health people, nurses, doctors, parents, told these 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old folks, some your age, to go back inside and let the system work. And these young people said no. And for 150 something days, they showed up every day outside. It was 80, 90, 100 degrees when we first got there. It was 20 degrees the night Michael Brown's no decision came back. And these young people stayed there. I think it's just so important to appreciate that the bias that resides in our hearts is deadly. It's deadly in a passive way when we do nothing, and it's deadly in a very active way when 8 police officers can surround Mario Woods in broad daylight on a public street and shoot him down 20-something times and the police chief can get on the news the same night and say, without any investigation, that that was a valid kill. What, to me, Tamir Rice, Mario Woods, Yvette Henderson, Rakia Boyd, that's not implicit bias. There's something more sinister at work there. Implicit bias lives inside of many of us in a passive way when we don't have the outrage to make sure that the white supremacists who have infiltrated many levels of our government, our police agencies, are able to, without any accountability, rain havoc on our communities. So part of what our work, I think, has to be, we say the first revolution is always an internal revolution, that we have to be able to take the necessary steps to begin to measure the bias we have, take into account how that even plays itself out in public health terms, in terms of poverty. I know many of us, hope and wish we lived in a post-racial society. Please believe Black folk wish that, probably every day. But we don't have the luxury to believe a beautiful lie, right? And we need more folk in the public health sector and other places to stare at the ugly truth and figure out, how do we change it? I'll just close with this. There has not been one day in this country's history where a dark body, a poor body, has not been subjected to arbitrary violence at the hands of this state. And in order for that to be undergirded, it required religious, public policy, and public health explanations to make it make sense to the larger society. Until we are able to create frames and narratives that make it not make sense for this to happen, we will continue to see it happen. So I pray your task would be maybe not to shut a street down like we're all gonna probably do tonight or tomorrow or the next day, tonight. But what is the most radical thing you can do as a public health practitioner to make sure that no one can read the research you are producing in your field and feel like it is okay for Black bodies to be destroyed on video camera in the dark of night, and we turn our heads the other way? I pray and hope that that could be a big takeaway you all take. That will address your bias, I believe, for sure.
So, Rosa, you've mentioned how through PICO you guys have tried to establish a policy agenda that's oriented towards Black Lives Matter. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the policy priorities that you guys are considering or have worked on in the past and how it aligns with the movement?
Yeah. So I think the point that Pastor Mike just made is really important. In any campaign, successful campaign that I've ever been a part of over the last 20 years, it's always involved an inside and outside strategy, right? And so there's the shutting the street down, shutting down whatever, and then there's the inside strategy, whether it's where I work at the state capitol, whether it's within the guise of your profession that you will all soon be a part of, or whether you're a dean or a professor at this school. We have also had to check ourselves, even within a progressive, community-based organizing institution that is also rooted in white supremacy. And so it has been a struggle, and I'm just being really transparent with you guys, right? Like, it is a struggle, even in a progressive movement, to do progressive things. And I hope that's not shocking to anyone, but that's the truth. And so at PICO, we have, one, we've turned the lens inward, and we have started to call each other out on white privilege and why, as an organization that is trying to serve the needs of communities of color not led by people of color. We've engaged on issues around mass incarceration, around providing opportunities for formerly incarcerated folks, the police reform stuff that I mentioned earlier, data collection, trying to destroy the school to prison pipeline. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? And so I think that, certainly we were able over this year to capitalize in a very small way on the incredible, incredible courage that we've seen from young Black folks all across this country who have shown us what it's going to take to try to make Black Lives Matter, and as an organization that has a responsibility to respond to that and to follow suit. And so we are again looking to figure out which policy issues within a very racist, cowardly institution that is called our state capitol, our state legislature, what policies we might be able to win to make Black Lives Matter. So we're again looking at police reform. We're looking at how do we prevent Black bodies from being thrown into prison and jail? How do we figure out how to receive people when they come home so that they're successful? Because it is almost impossible if you can't get a job, if you can't get housing, if you can't get health care. How do you succeed? It's hard enough if you have a law degree from a UC to succeed, right? And so I think, we're constantly evaluating that, and it's a messy process, but those are the issues that I think that we have to be dedicated to for the rest of our lifetimes. We have to dismantle mass incarceration if we're to make Black Lives Matter.
So, Andrew, you're coming at this question from a different position, being a student in the School of Public Health, but obviously seeing the connections to the broader movement that people are articulating on the panel. How are you making those connections within the context of your demands? Can you give us a sense for how that's playing out, and what are the demands that the students have?
So just going back a little bit, and I think this definitely goes to the demands that the SPH Students in Solidarity with Black Lives Matter group came up with, and also demands that came from across our school community from the first 2 town hall events that we had. A couple of things that we really wanted that we said was sort of a state of emergency that we needed was curriculum change. The school's going through a curriculum redesign process right now, and it's baffling to us that we don't have a structural competency that talks really about the power hierarchies that exist within our population and within this society that, as the other panelists have said, keeps racism alive, keeps white supremacy alive. It is those power structures that we need to be able to name, articulate, and then figure out in our classes, how will you dismantle that when you go into the real world? And I think that's definitely one of the connections we see with the larger BLM movement. And so calling for curriculum change, writing that competency, writing our competency around cultural humility, recognizing our own biases, as Rosa said, when we work with disadvantaged populations, and what does it mean not really to work in solidarity with these communities, but in conjunction with these communities, which is something that Professor Amani Nurjeter pointed out to me, that working in conjunction with a community, especially communities that have been very active in the Black Lives Matter movement across this nation, is very different than us just standing in solidarity with them, because it really takes their and equal partnership. And what does that actually mean when we're developing that competency here in the School of Public Health? Other things that we asked for was greater transparency around our hiring practices of our faculty. We have incredible faculty of color here at the School of Public Health who do amazing work, but there aren't enough of them, and they are overburdened because they are the ones that the burden falls on when it comes to dealing with issues of racism, power, and privilege. And so who are we hiring? What are the opportunities for people to be hired? And can we bring in a more equitable division of professors who do this work in the real world to be able to bring that back to our students and say, this is what it means to really be addressing racism in my own work. Because if we don't see that from our professors, how are we expected to go out into the world and do that? And if there are too few professors who are doing that and everyone wants to flock to them, how can we reasonably expect them to be able to cater to all of these different students? That doesn't make sense. That system does not work. So how do we really rework that system and making sure we have an equitable environment, not an equal environment? And back to faculty, our faculty of color are doing so many things and they're not being compensated for it. All the things that are behind the scenes in terms of mentoring students, in terms of sitting on certain committees, and what does that actually look like? And then other things we wanted to do in terms of trainings for our faculty, our staff, and our students on power and privilege. The graduating class of 2015, as their class gift, actually funded these trainings for the School of Public Health that I believe will take place this spring. And so that's definitely something we haven't had before that we're looking to have. And I would be completely remiss if I did not mention that out of these efforts, we already had what was called a Diversity, Inclusion, Community, and Equity Committee, or our DICE committee. And so that committee existed already as the student group formed. And sort of out of the demands of the student group and out of the demands of our town hall events, the DICE committee, from an institutionalized perspective, has really taken up a lot of these charges, from curriculum to town halls to addressing microaggressions in the classroom and to our recruitment of students and faculty and what that actually means.
Man, I want to come rock with you.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna just put this down.
Dr. Mike.
Yo,
So,
you know, obviously.
but you know what's dope about that? Like you don't have to wait. You know, like I think a lot of people like think you gotta wait to become a freedom fighter. And I think that you all's freedom fighting work starts right now, as a student, as a learner, as an advocate, because how you carry out your work now is formation for how you will carry it out later. And so, like, you know, rocking with this brother and all the work that him and others are doing, if you're not rocking with him, then I think that you're not preparing yourself to do freedom fighting work, which then makes you a part of the status quo, which makes you like living in the legacy of slavery, white subjugation, and all the other things that everybody likes to say, well, I didn't own a slave. Well, if you're not dismantling the system, you're validating it and you're keeping it in place. So I just want to some fire, man.
So please.
Just quick, thank you I really appreciate that. And I think, you know, I can say all of these things about our demands and what we want, but the reality is we need help. Not all of these things are getting done as good as they sound when we talk about them, but we need more people to help us do this kind of work. It can't fall on, I'm looking at Darlene and Abby right now and Mary Minkler, and so we need more help from all of you. So thank you.
Great. So two of our panelists have to leave shortly. So I want to just jump right into Q&A. Pastor Mike and Kat have to go to San Francisco for some very important events. And so I'd love to just get into a back and forth where members of the audience ask us questions. And so the gentleman in the red sweater in the back here.
I first want to thank everyone. This is really important. I appreciate this happening. Pastor Mike, I have a question for you. You talked in your introduction about leading youth through the hand-raising exercise, which is very sad to hear about. And I've got a question about resiliency. Namely, how do you explain to youth, particularly youth of color, Black youth, that they need to be more resilient than their peers, than a lot of their peers that are not of color? And how do you explain that so that they don't become jaded or sort of lost? You know, because clearly that burden to be that resilient falls disproportionately on color.
It's where I appreciate, I see Tony in the room. I'm gonna try to challenge Brother Eichen over there. I hate resilience. I want to encourage my young people to thrive, right? And that's not like just a catch. I mean, I think I heard that from you or somebody in one of our trainings together. Now, I understand your question though, right? I think that we did a study in our network. Vanderbilt did a study on the impact that organizing and advocacy has on under-resourced populations. And it found that the more you can lead people into their own power, the more tools they have to thrive under the worst conditions, right? So why I believe in organizing is because it is one of the most concrete ways to teach folk who are living under systems and structures that are built to destroy us. It teaches them, is it judo? I don't know, jujitsu is one of them things. Where you take the energy that is, being pushed towards you and you shift it, right? And you actually use it as a lever. And that's the work that I think we've been trying to do, is we're trying to figure out how to turn more young people and directly impacted folks into activists, into people who can take the power that they have and use it as a force for good, so we can be thriving. And we teach them all the critiques, the power analysis. We help them realize that it is not their problem, it is not their fault. And I'll say also that the sad part about it is that many people aren't built for that, right? Many people aren't built to bench press 1,000 pounds. So they crush under the weight of that. So the work that many of us have to do that are built for that is to make sure that they are not overly penalized for being crushed under the weight of systemic oppression. And the way our young people are experiencing that, they're more disposed to mental illness. So the young man that was executed by the San Francisco Police Department was mentally ill. So if you're Black and mentally ill, even if you have a benign butter knife, is that an excuse to be shot 25 times down on the street because 8 police officers can't figure out how to subdue a 4'8" mentally ill 26-year-old? Right? So part of what we have to figure out is public health would allow us to name drug addiction, drug dealing, alcoholism, mental illness, even shooting folk in the street as a public health crisis, not just a criminal, throw people away, lock them away crisis. And I think that's the work that we have to do as well.
Woman, actually. That happens. I get that a lot. As with the previous person, thank you, all of you, for your time, and I'll try and be somewhat coherent in asking this as I'm still getting my thoughts together. I noticed with the video that you put on for us, and even the last still that you left it on, I started counting the images that were on there, and I suppose this question is somewhat two-part and motivated as a direct response to that, as to where do you see the position of trans women of color and of disabled people within the overall span of the work that you do? Because I know Pastor was already mentioning someone who had just recently passed. I think it was also Kajimi Powell it was a couple of minutes after a call came, he was killed by cops, and it was noted on record as being mentally ill or things of that sort. But also for trans women of color like myself, there is a very real threat of police violence. And a lot of us, I'm 23 and I'm kind of surprised I would be surprised if I make it past 5 more years. And I know I've read far too many accounts of Black trans women who've had even less time than that. And similar accounts of incarceration and of institutionalization for Black disabled folks. So I guess part of me wants to ask, where do you see Black Lives Matters and the overall work that you do in this, if only in part because it seems like the media that you're showing, even in this, is very male and cis focused?
Yeah, great question.
So one of the beautiful things about this movement is that when we say all Black lives, we're talking about all Black lives. We're talking about Black men, we're talking about Black women, we're talking about Black trans women, Black trans men, we're talking about disabled bodies, we're talking about incarcerated bodies, we're talking about all the bodies, all the bodies, right? And this movement has been explicit about that, right? With queer leadership at the forefront, with our Say Her Name action, that was a national, it was in response to Rakia Boyd, but there was a national Say Her Name action that explicitly brought up, Kayla Moore and Shelley Hilliard and Brandy Martine, and I mean that list goes on and on too. And I just want to, I want to qualify what she said in terms of the average life expectancy for a Black trans woman is 25 years old. That is criminal. Right, and so I just want to be clear that we are talking about that we are highlighting that. We actually just had, and you can add on to this because I wasn't there, I'm going to the next one, but we just had a retreat, and as follow-up from that, right, one of Black trans women leaders in our movement, right, called out for us to have even more direct conversation. I'm not saying we got it right, or that we've got it perfect, but I can say that there is space to have the conversation, that we are open to being pushed, that we are being pushed, that we are being challenged, and that we are intentional consistently about uplifting our Black trans brothers and sisters and queer folks.
And if I could add on real quickly, there's like a movement within Black Lives Matter, and there's been brave leadership by transgender women, gender non-conforming folks who really talk about all Black folks, right? And so in the Bay Area chapter, we've been thinking about how can we concretely support the trans community, the gender non-conforming community. So there's been a few things that have developed. So I don't know if y'all heard of TGIJP, that's a Transgender Intersex Justice Project. In one of their fights that were locally in San Francisco, there was a shelter that was discriminative against trans folks, specifically Black trans women. So we did like a Black Lives Matter mobilization in support of TGIJP to really hold that shelter accountable. And now I'm talking about real-time accountability. We called the director out and we talked about the issues right there. But also, there's a need to also provide more technical support. And so also I'm part of the Blackout Collective. We're direct action practitioners. We train Black communities on how to take direct action, how to engage in civil disobedience, how to leverage our power to create change. And so that's another thing that's in the work. We're starting to do direct action trainings with trans community. And so it's still a movement within a movement where a lot of work can be done to center Black trans women, trans folks within the movement, but that work is starting, and I'm proud to say that we are really looking to like, how can we hold ourselves accountable to all of our folks, and so that work is happening, and I thank you for raising that issue and concern.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to add on to that conversation and just talk about Black women as well, because they talked about it very Black male heavy, and I've been doing this work on police terror for a long time, and the test is always if I'm speaking to a room and I say, name me victims of police terror, right? And I get Oscar Grant, Alan Bluford, Amadou Diallo, it goes on and on and on. That's another really beautiful thing that this particular moment in time has brought up, is that the war on Black women's lives is also very real, right? I mean, if you just think about just the recent history with Sandra Bland, Yvette Henderson, Natasha McKenna, Rakia Boyd, I could go on and on and on. And so it's also really important for us to be talking about Black women's lives, and not in this way, because the thing that the mainstream wants to do, right, you get these stupid questions about, well, who's getting killed most, or, right, and it's not about allowing white supremacy to further pit Black men and Black women against each other, which is one of the biggest tools they've used to decimate our communities and our family system, but it's about understanding that all of our liberation, our Black trans liberation, our Black men's liberation, our Black children's liberation, our Black women's liberation, is all tied together, right? Because if I can't get free, he can't get free. If he can't get free, I can't get free. If she can't get free, I can't get free, right?
And can I just say, as I need to, one of the biggest helpful things that came out of the police executive thing that the president did, published all kinds of data on police officers and their mental health and their well-being and their violent tendencies and all kinds of things that demonstrate to us, right, that our inability to create public health frames as the dominant frame for how we structure our systems and societies erase the humanity in all of us, right? So police officers are more likely to kill themselves with their own weapon than be killed by anyone that they're policing. They're more likely to beat on their partners, particularly the male police officers. They're more likely to be addicted to drugs and alcohol and all Now, again, right, there's a certain kind of opportunity that I think we can bring into these conversations if we understand, as Kat just said, that our liberation is all bound up together. I don't hate the police, because Jesus tells me to love everybody. And they better be glad Jesus is telling me that. But I do think James Lawson has been a really important person in my life because he talks about love as a force, right? And so when we unleash hatred upon folk, it makes us unable to actually create what we're talking about, public health frames. So I just want to lift that up. Many of our clergy have had to come to a conversion experience around transgender folks and LGBT folks and women and other folks that we otherize. Because if you don't love folk, you won't advocate for healing frames in their lives, right? So I just want to put that out there too as I walk out the door.
Yeah, I know. I know you. I know you guys have to run. Thank you so much. 2 more minutes. Okay, 2 more minutes. So, when we talk about the liberation of Black folks, how does that liberation affect other communities, right? And when we talk about the connection to, other movements, it would be good to hear from you guys just a little bit about, your thinking. How does the liberation of Black folk improve outcomes for all Americans?
From my perspective, I can state it very simply. I already said it, right? Like, if I'm not free, you're not free. You can't live in a hate-filled society and exist in true freedom, right? You cannot be free in a society that thrives or benefits off of the consistent oppression of another group of people. I think specifically when talking about other people of color, I think what's beautiful when we get it right, and we don't always get it right, but what's beautiful when we get it right is that we are able to push back on another tactic that white supremacy has utilized to maintain its domination, which is to divide and conquer, right? To rather than me growing up understanding, well, not me, because I was raised by radical parents, but people growing up not understanding who my true, pastor's gone, enemy is, right? That my enemy is white supremacy. My enemy is not the Latino brother or sister down the street, right? Latinos are not taking my job, right? The white developer has decided that Latinos will work for less than Black people are, so they are taking my job, right? Having the conversation in very real ways allows us to see the commonality of our struggle, and if we get it right, will allow us to unite in a struggle for liberation against the common enemy, which is white supremacy.
Andrew.
Can I add, and I just want to add on to just what Kat said, and in response to the great question that was asked previously, life is intersectional. Health is intersectional. And we do a poor job sometimes at considering intersectionality in health and in life. But if we don't do it, we're going to get it wrong. We're not going to get it right because none of us have individual identities that are separate from one another, and where our humanity is bound up in one. And if we don't recognize that and we don't take the time to explore our common identities, I think that's where the fault lies. We're so busy trying to identify who we are as people, who we are as individuals, as separate from my brother or my sister, and not together. And that's where the problems start.
Yeah. Just to jump in, I get a lot of weird reactions when I say this, but I really believe that the liberation of my people travels through the liberation of Black people. And I say that because until we have eradicated anti-Blackness, all of us other shades will continue to be in the state we're in. And to Andrew's point, I think for me, one of the hardest things year after year in being a part of a progressive movement is knowing that until we all agree that our liberation is actually tied to dark bodies, we will continue to lose. That's why we can't get comprehensive immigration reform. That's why we can't eliminate mass incarceration. That's why little Black kids are getting kicked out of school for willful defiance, right? There is a whole host of things that we will continue to fight for, but we will continue to fail because we're working in silos. Because for some reason, some of us think, and I call out my people all the time, we think that, no, I have to love Latinos. Like, my people are dying. Well, yeah, and guess what? We're gonna keep dying until we see our liberation tied to hers, right? And so I really, really want us to really, our job, if you're nodding your head, is that when your mom says some anti-Black stuff, you gotta call her out on that. If it's your grandmother, right, and they don't even speak English, well, learn how to call them out in that language. Because let me tell you, this is really, really important, right? We're in the holiday season. We're all, God willing, many of us will spend time with our families. A lot of these people that we're scared of are in our own families. Those people that shot people are somebody's family, right? And so until we really, in your heart and your soul, believe that your liberation is tied to Black bodies, we will all continue to be under the threat of this thing we call white supremacy.
And what I was going to add to that is that we talked about implicit bias and that being in all of us, including Black people, right? Internalized racism is real. But what we notice is also in our movements, there's incredible anti-Blackness. So it's important for organizations who don't have a majority of Black staff to talk about anti-Blackness. I can name our experience within the immigrant rights movement, right? The way the media paints a picture is that it's just a Latino issue, right? But there's plenty of Black immigrants who live here. So we've been pushing the immigrant rights movement to advocate for all the immigrants here, including Black immigrants and including API folks. But when we look at the labor movement, when we look at the environmental justice movement, a lot of these movements contain anti-Black elements in it. So what does that say when we're building a movement for freedom, a movement against exploitation of people, but in that movement there's anti-Blackness? So what has happened with Black Lives Matter is that we've been able to push this intersectional approach and even think about cross-sectoral movement building. So just in the Bay Area, at least, there's been labor who has been showing up for Black lives. There's been a faith community that's been showing up for Black lives. There's been Agents for Black Lives. There's been white solidarity, anti-racist groups that have formed too. And that's incredibly important to be able to really talk about comprehensive justice. If we're not doing that work within our movements, then we're failing our people. So I thank all of you all for naming that, but it is incredibly important that we have an intersectional analysis in our work.
Thank you. Please. So I'm here with my two friends and myself. We go to Bishop O'Dowd High School. And why we're really here is because the youth and ourselves in particular really want to get involved, and we really want to have a true voice in the movement that's coming and the movement that's rising in America, the Black Lives Matter movement. But we feel like we don't really have a place to go to really get active and to really get involved. And I guess what I'm really asking is what do youth do to have a powerful voice, and what do youth do to be really engaged and involved in the movement? Because we want to be involved, but we feel like
we just don't know the right place to go or say the right thing. So, I mean, just like what do we do as like high schoolers, as youth? Because we really want to get involved too.
So I think we're going to tag team this question if I leave something off the list. I mean, I know that all of the groups that Devonte and I are a part of are open and welcoming to young people, and we actually have high school folks participate. Black Lives Matter, we meet twice a month. If you're interested in attending those meetings, come see, well, I think I'm going to probably leave sooner, come see Devonte. APTP, we meet the third Wednesday of every month. You got a banging, I don't know what the policies on this campus, but this is a banging BSU chapter on this campus, right? That's all about the business to connect that way. I know the Alan Bluford Center for Justice on First Fridays has a youth cipher that is very heavily politically oriented. That's someplace you could go. I would encourage you to engage with any of our organizations on Facebook. Like that's really where, right, the communication stuff is happening. What am I missing?
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is that it's important to organize from where you're at. So if y'all don't have like a BSU chapter or something like that at Bishop O'Dowd, make one, think about the issues Black students are facing at Bishop O'Dowd. I'm sure there's plenty of issues. And even like invite us, to support you and your work. So you all can definitely plug into a bunch of the projects that we have going on, but it's also important for y'all to organize from where you're at.
Can I ask you how you found out about this?
Yeah. Awesome.
Go, Mom.
Organizing mom, yes.
That's dope.
So,
Mom's right there.
I have a hand way in the back.
Yeah. Is this on? Oh, yeah. My name's Steve, and thanks for your incredible talks. Just speaking as an elder 60s activist, I just would like to say that, first of all, there's been high rates of suicide from veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. And a lot of these people are in the police forces now. There's a lot of veterans that, I don't know if people know about it, but a lot of veterans have been hired by the police, and a lot of them have been emotionally and mentally damaged from their experiences in the wars with Iraq. But also that as outrageous as what's happening in this country right now, it doesn't surprise myself and my friends when you look at our past, where we lost 20 million, maybe over 20 million Native Americans murdered, 3 million Vietnamese murdered, 4 million blacks abused for 200 years. And then, anyway, it's just a history, and the system has to be dismantled from A to Z. That's the problem.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
And also elitism contributes to this because people think they're better because they got a better car, better house, more money. It's all BS.
Thank you. Okay. So please, we don't have a mic right here, but I'm just going to come up front really quick, and then we'll come back. And I'll repeat your question so everyone can hear.
Hi. Thank you for your words. It really helped a lot. I guess I have a question about, like, how do we recognize, especially within the Black community, but just, across the span of marginalized peoples, how do we recognize our place in the movement? There's diversity within, the Black community, and, lately I've been kind of feeling like, people are affected by different social structures and social constructs and are differently vulnerable to, doing direct action or, engaging on the ground, and how do you, and especially and right now, as much as I really want to be in the street, I'm fearful for my life, right? And as part of the 600 Black people on campus, it's I hold a very I mean, how do you navigate this space for trying to contribute to liberation? But
Can I just repeat it so folks have it who couldn't hear you? How do you recognize your place in the movement? What I heard also is just what are the various ways you can engage beyond direct action? Because oftentimes people feel like that's the only entry point.
I can answer part of it. So direct action is actually so little as when you think about the day-to-day in the work. And so it's important to, like when I think of organizing, I think of like setting up goals and figuring out how to get there. And so like there's multiple tactics to get there, and direct action is one tactic. But there's a lot of needs that we have in this movement, whether it's developing internal analysis within the university to see how the university could address anti-Blackness, whether it's creating a healing space. I know that's been really important for the Black Lives Matter Bay Area chapter, is like when we come together, we have cultural workers and people who engage in spiritual practices come and bless the space and even lead in ceremony as we engage in direct action. So when we shut down BART last Black Friday, we had a huge ceremony in which people took lower risk and just engaged in a healing ceremony while we were shutting down BART. So there's always like these multiple ways, multiple tactics to engage. It's not only direct action. And actually, a lot of folks who come in just seeking to do direct action, like that's not what we need in the movement. We need folks who are dedicated to putting in the work on the daily when it's not that exciting, when it's not like these selfies we can take in the movement, right? What are the daily things that we can do to make Black Lives Matter?
Yeah. And oh, go ahead.
Can I just say super briefly, like, your presence here is an act of defiance, right? So your success is revolutionary, right? Because you're not even supposed to be here. So yes, you have a responsibility to be successful, and you also have a responsibility, dare I say, to not forget where you came from and to not forget that your presence came on the backs of other people.
I guess the only other thing I would say is, everybody has a role to play in this struggle, everybody. And those roles cannot be the same thing. We could not have 600 people locked down to the West Oakland BART train. That wasn't gonna work, right? We need policy people, we need, as he say, healers, we need teachers, we need folks to run Black schools, we need folks to be thinking about all of the other ways in which the war on Black lives is happening, right? One of the conversations that actually I'm in with Pastor McBride and some other radical Black pastors is how we engage their congregations, because their congregations ain't gonna go get tear gas, right? That's not happening. But if we're talking about the miseducation of our children, how many teachers do you have in your congregation that can run a Saturday school, right? If we're talking about gentrification happening, how many folks can write a check so we can go buy a plot of land? How many folks are Black farmers and we can build and grow our own food? All of those things are revolutionary acts. I think that a lot of us, have been lured by the images of the Black Panther Party and the folks out there with the guns and the marching and all of that stuff, and that's the idea that we get when we're talking about the Black liberation movement, but we're not thinking about people that are actually cooking the breakfast, right? The people that were running the medical clinics, the sisters that were doing, you know what I mean? Like it was all of that made that moment happen. And so I think for you to explore, or anybody to explore as many different pieces and facets of this movement as possible, and it'll sing to you, it'll call to you, it'll be that thing that when you can't look at another dead Black body fall and you think you have to turn your head away from this work forever, it'll be that thing that you've committed to doing that'll get you up the next day and continue to perpetuate your involvement in this struggle.
I'll be really, really brief about this because I think everyone else has said basically what I would have wanted to say too. But what I think is important, and I'll preface this by saying that conversations alone do not do much. Talking about things all the time does not really accomplish what we want, but that doesn't mean they're not meaningful. And so in your classes, you still have to inject this type of dialogue, because if you don't, it won't happen. right? So it's always important to keep bringing these issues up, and that's doing something. When your professor glosses over something and you say, hey, wait a minute, let's wind that back and let's actually talk about that, that's doing something. So never think that that small act isn't doing something that's really meaningful.
Yes, I just wanted to say, please forgive me ahead of time if I forget, because I'm a mother of 6, and my brain goes blur. However, I want to say this. I think we need to start, first of all, with our mindset that then changes the heart. And by that, I mean, as a Black person attending this, I don't look at it as defiance. It's my human right to be here. That's number one. Number two is we have a president that started his presidency that said, I'm not the president of Black America. How do you think a Black person feels? How my children felt when this man said that. And then we see these images time after time after time where my people are killed, and we're told that we're not to be outraged, we are to be peaceful. When I see somebody killed, just in general, it hurts. But to see Black person after Black child after Black woman, man, whatever, even the elderly are not exempt from this. And I'm told that I cannot be outraged. My work started in 1990, where my community was contaminated. We were told not to be angry. Hold on. We got into nonprofit, and majority of the nonprofit was led by white. A lot of us Blacks were put out because of that. My children, just like your mom, I'm the one that got them involved in this. So it is a collective effort. But what I also want to say is this, it actually starts with all of us. And as you know, Marc, I don't know if you remember me or not, but we started with PolicyLink. And when I brought Black-specific issues to PolicyLink, I was told that it was political death, not to mention Hispanic with Black. And I kept pushing and kept pushing, saying, because I advocate for my people does not mean I'm excluding any others. Thank goodness for the California Endowment, who had the vision to see that it's okay to fund Black leadership, that it's not at the exclusion of other races, that it is collectively, as the sister said there, y'all struggle start with Black struggle. You wanna know why? Because Black people are despised by everybody, including Black.
Yes.
So we start from that point having to work up. And also when a Black woman gets up and speak and we're about to be cut off, because that's usually what we're used to.
I just want you to ask a question.
As well. I don't want to ask a question. I'm making a statement. As a sister that's been in this struggle for a long time, to see that our young ones are picking it up and going forward, it is a collective effort. You start at home first, then it goes to school, then it goes to work, then it goes to the funders, then it goes to the politicians. It's all of us collectively, but we have to start believing that it doesn't have to be a white voice that speaks on behalf of Black issues for it to be validated. We don't have to include Hispanic with Black, not that they're not having their issues, but we can be specific to Black and start dealing with some of these issues and understanding, first of all, we have a damn right to be outraged about what's going on, and until we all are, nothing's gonna change.
Thank you. So I'm told that we're supposed to be having a reception across the hall, but I feel like people still have questions. And if it's okay with leadership, I'd like to just continue for a little bit longer. Where do you want to go? Right over here. And Professor.
X. I retired to be able to do more work in the community with groups like Safe Return. But anyway, I'm glad this came up, really glad, because I've been concerned about something, and I'm sorry that Reverend Mike isn't here to address it. Hope some of you can. And that is that I'm looking at all these movements, and it seems to me that with things like ceasefire, Cure Violence, doing terrific work, but it's the African Americans who are in the field, the Black people who are, talking to the brothers and trying to get change on the individual level, and it's the white lawyers primarily who are doing work that also has to happen on the policy level. I only know of two really good projects, Safe Return in Richmond and the work going on in the Bronx with people who are here, where African Americans, Blacks are doing the work on the policy level, and they're working in solidarity with others if they wish to be, but they're out there. And I just think the separate, unequal, where the whites are doing strategy and policy and the blacks are doing, brother, don't fight your brother. It's just not, it's worrying me.
Well, just to quickly go back to the statement from before, and is it LaDonna? I can't remember. Out of Richmond, ma'am. I can't remember yet. Remind me of your name again. Is it LaDonna? Right, I remember. So to go back to that comment, I think what we've tried to do, at least Rosa and I, we work in Sacramento pretty regularly. And our paradigm and our focus has really been to change that dynamic, right? So that people who are doing work on the ground are actually the ones who are influencing the policy formulation and the policy development in the Capitol. And so we are two, sort of individuals who work to push against the dynamic that you're talking about, because it is very real in terms of that schism. The Capitol is for people who are traditionally white and people who are, much more privileged, and the streets are where people of color are supposed to stay doing the organizing, doing the service delivery work. And I feel like our work has really created a shift in policy making and has energized even the legislators themselves to get behind some of our work in a really new and different way. And to LaDonna's point, I think there's a much less concern around being, pro-Black or pro-Latino in the Capitol now. Given some of the organizing that's happening in communities and how we bring that into the building. Rosa, would you add?
Yeah, and I think I would just add to that. I think, what you're saying is, if you go to the state capitol, by and large, it's still not a diverse enough place. And, I do have to footnote that there are, unfortunately, a lot of super, super, super conservative folks of color, right? We have a lot of Latinos who forgot where they came from. I went to law school with some of them. There's a lot of, there's some Black legislators that, even though they might represent I won't name names, but they might represent pretty much all folks of color, they forget that when they vote, right? And so there is a real crisis in this legislature. There is so little courage. And so the demand for Marc and myself and other folks of color to really be at the forefront of policymaking is more critical than ever if we show up in a different way, right? We can't show up and act like the other lobbyists, right? And so when I went to my lobbyist training earlier this year, it was like I was in the middle of Nebraska. I was like, wow. It reminded me of law school. But I will say this, and this is...
Go.
Right, at least I go. But I will say this, because how we show up really matters right now. It matters because most folks of color, and I'm gonna call it out, most folks of color who get to that level and they start getting those dollars, they sell out in a second, right? In a second, to the highest bidder, sold. And so how we start to show up and how we start to shape policy is just as important as the policy itself. And so when we showed up on September 2nd of 2015 to get this racial profiling bill signed into law, we had a 1,000 person die-in at the state capitol. 1,000 bodies were on the floor of the state capitol. We shut down the governor's office. Physically shut down the governor's office. We shut down the hallway. The governor's office called me a few days later and said, you guys shut down the governor's office. Not yeah, you shut down the governor's office, but you shut down the governor's office, right? And so these are things that we tried to get arrested really hard and they wouldn't do it. We said we were gonna go on a hunger strike for 7 days. And that's ultimately what got the governor to sign the bill, because he didn't want that publicity, right? And so how we show up to get the job done is really, really important. And so those of us that I grew up in the hood, and so I can't forget that when I'm in those four walls, right? Because that fire, that passion, like you have to bring that. Because if you're just like, well, you know, thank you so much, I really appreciate your time, you know, like you can't, you know, there is a certain amount of that, but at some point you have to be willing to lose, right? And I think that's what we're doing. That's what Marc's talking. We have to be willing to lose to gain somebody's crumbs. We don't have time for that.
We have to be willing to confront power. And, you know, everyone knows, though, that is power concedes nothing without a demand. And it is true. And so, you know, it takes a lot of courage on our part, but also the part of our partners to engage in that way. There were, oh, please.
Also, I wanted to name that the nonprofit industrial complex is part of this issue. The way in which nonprofits are funded is extremely racist. And so, like, I'm part of a all-Black organization. The issues we typically run into is that we're understaffed and over capacity, and that's a trend of Black organizations across the nation. And also, there's a saying, white is right. You know, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So when we think about this is that there's a lot of people of color, like that was mentioned before, that have to aspire to whiteness in order to get positions in these organizations who are in direct conversation with decision makers, with politicians, with leaders. And so we have to address systemic structural racism and also address the nonprofit industrial complex. And so often, like, Black organizations are starting to see how can we get funded outside of like the normative ways in which nonprofits get funded. How can we look to member-based models? How can we look to grassroots models of funding? But just generally, the way in which nonprofits are funded is extremely racist today. And that's part of the contributing factor to why people of color and also radical people of color who hold our interests and our values at hand, that's why they aren't at the table, is because of this larger systemic structural issue.
Thank you. So, I see two more hands. I'm going to take those two questions and then we're going to close because I'm afraid that the reception won't happen if we don't end now. So, ma'am, yes, and then you in the back. Right here first, and then you in the back.
Hi. Thank you all very much, and I wish Kat was here still for this question, but any of you would probably be able to answer it. So in a lot of the areas where we see the, overwhelming number of problems, it's also been hopeful to see policy platforms develop. And one that I have a question about that I may just not know about or I don't see is around media accountability. And while we can call out the media and gather the on-the-ground testimony to change the narrative that gets told, what sort of policy strategies or system change action around media can we begin to organize around, just given the hot debates around First Amendment rights and everything? What can we do in that arena?
Yeah.
Because it is so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, there are very few organizations that are working at that level. Unfortunately, it's just not funded well. But there are groups like Color of Change, Center for Media Justice, Center for Popular Democracy. They do some of this work. Color of Change and Center for Media Justice are the two sort of biggest organizations doing this. But you're absolutely right. That watchdog function is underfunded, and there needs to be more accountability of the media because it serves to validate and further a lot of the issues that we're talking about instead of responsible reporting and journalistic practices. And so I would just say, there's a huge need there. I don't really have a great answer for you other than to say those are a couple of organizations that are doing that work. They're local, and then there's a need for more of it. Ma'am.
Thank you. So my question was about the criminal justice system and the mass incarceration of Black people, or the permanent second-class citizenship subjugation of Black people through mass incarceration. What kind of policies are being done or created or advocated for to kind of combat this major issue in the community?
So it's a great question. So I'll give you the short answer and then I'll give you the longer answer. So just like in direct response to your question right now at this moment in California, as we're trying to, and we being organizations across the state are trying to develop their policy priorities for the next year, right? Legislators are doing the same thing. Kind of what we're seeing on the forefront around issues of mass incarceration there's a lot of conversation around sentencing reform. I don't know how familiar folks are with, we have 3 strikes, we have mandatory minimums, we have like all these ridiculous laws, right, that disproportionately, of course, impact Black folks. And so that's something that has been an incredible challenge. We are working as part of a faith table at the urging of Governor Brown, interestingly, to develop some kind of sentencing reform that we're hoping will end in a sentencing reform policy that gives judges the discretion basically to not incarcerate people, but instead to remand them to community-based programs or restorative justice types of programs, right? And so we're really trying to figure out, like, overall, like, how you attack this notion that the purpose of imprisonment is punishment, right? And that's the purpose right now. And so it's not just punishment, it is the dehumanization, right? It is the stripping of any shred of humanity and hope that you might have in life, right? So that's what we're doing. And so we're really trying to figure out ways within a political context, right, Marc, of how we can successfully start to chip away at these types of policies that just continue to incarcerate Black and brown men at ridiculous rates. Some of the other things really are centered around trying to prevent people from going to jail or prison in the first time, right? So like, how do we create programs so that we are reinvesting in communities so that when people come home, they actually can get the services they need to be able to get a job. And so we've worked to ban the box in California, right, which, the little box on applications if you've been convicted of a felony. We're trying to do that with housing. Because it's one thing, God willing, pray, for those of y'all that pray. So we're trying to do like these kinds of things, right? Like on both ends, we're trying to figure out like how we get services for folks who are incarcerated, how they get an ID so that when they leave, they actually have a source of identification. Think about how hard it is to do anything in your life without an ID, right? The most basic of things. And so there's a lot of those kinds of things that we're trying to build off of, that we're trying to do. Any of these that I have named are monumental. It is ridiculously shameful how hard it is to get anything that I have named passed through the legislature. The grander scheme, mass incarceration is like the proud child of father white supremacy, right? Like, it is the ultimate institution of anti-Blackness. And so going back to the earlier thing, right, like your work is so critically important, right? Like there's just chipping away. It requires all of us doing it together.
I'll just add to that really quickly from a frame that I work in. So I'm really interested in a lot of HIV work, and I think talking about how do we prevent people from being incarcerated, like HIV criminalization laws are like one example of that. How, we all know that Black people and people of color are disproportionately affected by HIV. And unfortunately, it is people of color also who are disproportionately affected by things like sex work. But when we don't decriminalize things like that, it's no surprise when we end up with disproportionately people of color in our prison system. And so it's also breaking down those laws that we may not think are directly related to incarceration, but that are very tied to health, that influence who ends up in our prisons and who does not.
Absolutely.
that in New York, actually, Baji is pushing a campaign called Safety Beyond Policing. We also try to talk about mass incarceration at the same time of talking about mass detention and mass deportation. Like, these issues are deeply interconnected. But one strategy, like a lot of us are really pushing for prison abolition, like, to be truthful. I will add, like, prison abolition is something that we can talk for days about, but also defunding the police, right? So there's been big campaigns to shift budgeting, like local budgeting for law enforcement, from the police towards community services, towards rehabilitation programs, towards things that keep our community safe beyond, like, policing. So it's really important for us to think about the budget, where the money's going, and starting to shift that to actually make our society non-reliant on policing and other law enforcement agencies that actually are terrorizing our communities, not making us safer. So yeah, that's definitely one big tactic, is to, like, shift the ways in which we prioritize our funding as a society. And divestment is one tactic. I know the African Black Coalition in the UC just released a statement saying that there's major investments within Geo Group and California, or not, CCA, which are the biggest prison investment industries. So it's important that we think about divestment and shifting priorities at the local level to really address some of these issues of within the criminal justice system.
Thank you. So policies and budget priorities are expressions of societal values. And all of this work around Black Lives Matter is really about shifting our values and living up to the ideals, frankly, that this country is founded upon but has never really realized. And in many instances, the work is centered around, this focus of ending mass criminalization and economic discrimination. I think that was a theme that you heard throughout, but it's connected to so much more. Those are just two very big focal points, criminalization being, more broadly defined to include police terror, state-sanctioned violence, surveillance, and all of the other things that go into incarceration and the prison industrial complex. And so as you're, working on these issues, as you're thinking about them, I think there are some tremendous opportunities as an institution to be participants for justice. Many people are often concerned that there's not an entry point for them because it doesn't have anything to do with them. I think you heard very clearly here today that everyone has a role to play. And everyone has a contribution that they can make. You are all assets to the movement. And in fact, a movement is not a movement unless there is a way for you to engage. And so we just hope that you will engage or check in with Devonte and Rosa and Andrew to find out more about how you can support their work. They have very active Facebook pages and social media outlets that you can learn more about them through. But while you have them here, I would encourage you to check in and find out ways that you can plug in the Berkeley Black Lives Matter group, the Oakland Black Lives Matter chapter, the national movement, all of the work that PICO is doing, and Andrew's student group are great outlets for you to be able to exercise your gifts. Thank you for having us so much, and please give our panelists a round of applause.